Do you want to destroy your friends at Dune Imperium with one of the funnest leaders in the game? Then you came to the right place. This is a strategy guide for the one and only Rhombur, a combat machine capable of grinding his opponents into dust with technology and an arsenal of dreadnoughts. Joining me today, the Prince Rhombur expert himself, Lannister 2005.
My name's Lannister. I've played roughly 300 games with Rhombur in both Ix and Immortality. Here to tell my side of how to do well with Rhombur and how to manage him in a sensible way. Orsky and I are going to run down every single aspect of it to make you a better Rhombur player.
Yeah, this is going to be a pretty in-depth conversation. Lannister is absolutely the community Rhombur expert and even won a tournament game recently. Let's just hop right in. First of all, to explain Prince Rhombur's abilities, his base ability, Heavy Lasgun Cannons. Your Dreadnoughts have 4 strength instead of 3, so a little bit of an added strength boost to Dreadnoughts. And then the Signet Ring is Ixian technology. It can either allow you to buy a tech when you go to a space, or it can give you a Negotiator, which is a 1 spice discount on a feature tech. So basically, it either gives you 1 spice or lets you buy a tech without having to go to the tech negotiation or Dreadnought spaces. Okay, with a little bit of background, let's discuss the base ability first, the Heavy Lasgun Cannons. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are it's an amazing boost. 1 extra sword power on a Dreadnought might not seem much, but a lot of the fights are dictated by the 1 sword, and it's 1 sword that's persistently there. So if you got 2 Dreadnoughts, that's 2 swords that are persistently there. And as I said, a lot of combats are dictated by just a hair of combat, so having that is ridiculously good, especially in the beginning.
Yep, completely agree. The early combats can often be won by 1 or 2 extra combat strength, and obviously the Dreadnoughts are going to be more important in the beginning of the game because combats are so close at that point. Usually in the late stage combats where combat power can easily reach over 20, that extra 1 strength from the Dreadnought might not be as valuable, so that kind of brings it into the point of discussion where if you're getting Dreadnoughts as Rhombur and you're going for a combat-heavy strategy, you generally want to get them earlier to get the most benefit out of them. That always leads to the discussion, is it worth getting Dreadnoughts early when you have to give up Swordmaster for the extra action or High Council Seat for an extra 2 persuasion every single round? What are your thoughts, Lannister?
So I'm going to dive into something that's a little bit more in-depth, and I hope that's okay with Orsky. It's about action compression.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so when you have a 3rd action, normally in the beginning, let's just take a look at this green character here. If you go to Arakeen right now, you get 1 extra troop and a card. So this would leave you with 1 in the garrison, and that's about it. So if you had another action to work with to go to Carthag, you'd get 1 extra troop, and you'd have an empty garrison. So in actuality, your 3rd agent afterwards would have negligible effects. It doesn't have many reinforcements coming in, and you're likely getting an extra spice, an extra Solari, or at most an extra water. So the last action is actually not that useful because all the premium spots have been taken, and you're not likely to have the access cards necessary because you're a combat character. So this is where action compression matters. So if, in contrast, you only have 2 actions, we'll say you have a full garrison again. So in that example, you saw there was 10 strength, right? So you go first action here, get your Dreadnought. Second action, you go to Arakeen. Troop, get a card. And look at that. We already have 8 strength of the 10. And this one is a persistent one, all right? So this will carry over time. You can choose to put in less troops to give yourself the secondary rewards because a lot of the times nobody wants to shove in 3 troops just to get extra rewards or to prevent you from getting additional rewards, especially since this doesn't cost you anything additional. So in this view, you have to think of it as a very sensible use of your economy, because a lot of the times, unless you have a large number of access cards, your 3rd action is not all that efficient, just because all the premium spots are taken and because you're not getting a lot of oomph for your 3rd action. So that is my opinion on the Swordmaster versus the Dreadnought usage.
Okay. So when do you usually aim to get your Swordmaster then?
So for me, I would normally aim to get it around turn 6, turn 7. A lot of people say, well, that seems to be a big waste of time, like you're missing a lot of extra actions. But that's actually when the extra actions matter the most. Because at that point in time, you've been loaded up with spice, you've been loaded up with troops, having hit and conspire, or sent in only half your troops from Highliner. So you actually need that extra action to shove in the extra troops. In the first 4 rounds, as I gave that example, you don't have those reinforcements to send in multiple waves of troops. Um, you need that third action to delay the turn order, and you need the third action to basically get in as many troops as you can with all the leftover resources. And I think that's the biggest pitfall of people who try to play combat is they don't understand the recovery mechanic. The recovery mechanic is you build up your resources for the first 5, 6 turns, and then you burst it all on turn 7, 8, and 9 onwards. So this is how I usually go about doing things. It's much more productive in terms of that. The major weakness, though, is that you normally can't rush down a lot of points very quickly. You kind of slowly build up to it. And so it takes some degree of planning, and we'll dive into that at a later point in the conversation.
Yeah. And the relevance of waiting until turn 7, 8, 9 is because that's when you get to the tier 3 conflicts.
Yes.
And this is when you
precisely.
start getting the 2 victory points for a combat win. Obviously, another downside would be if you end up getting Grand Vision and it doesn't get a point for you with the 2 bumps. But I'd say all the other combats are going to be pretty good with the waiting for the building up of resources, just trying to get to these high tier victory points at the end.
Yep, precisely.
And also, the nice thing is, if you're saving up resources with Rhombur to aim for these higher combats, you can still send these dreadnoughts in, get 4 power per, and take down the second place rewards from the earlier one. So you can grab 4 Solari for this for a pretty minimal commitment, 2 spice, a water and a spice. So there are a lot of good cheaper resources that can be picked up along the way without committing the resources you need for the late stage tier 3 conflicts.
Yep, that's precisely so. Also one thing I didn't want to leave out. The advantage for you to get 2 agents throughout the majority of the game is you get first dibs on quality cards. So you won't necessarily get a lot of power cards like Chom or Jessica just because of the way you're hitting different combat zones, but in the shadows, web of power, things that are 4 cost or under are within your range, and you're usually the first to get dibs on it because everyone's either mentatting or having their own swordmaster, so they are less likely to reveal before you, even if they've had the first turn before you. So that's another decisive advantage for Rhombur in this case.
You want to hop into the Signet Ring ability now?
Sure.
So we already kind of discussed what the Signet Ring ability does. It's Ixian technology. It lets you either gain a one of the tech cards from the row, or it allows you to discount a future tech. In that way, Rhombur becomes one of the best tech-oriented leaders in the game just because of their discounts and their ability to acquire techs without having to commit to the Dreadnought spot or the tech negotiation spot. It's a lot more flexible than I originally thought it was, because getting 1 spice for a Signet Ring play is not bad value at all. Additionally, it enables you to hit a combat space and buy a tech that gives troops, and the main one I'd be looking at in that scenario would be invasion ships, which gives you 4 troops when you buy it. If you send your Signet Ring down to, say, the Great Flat or Arakeen, you spend the spice to get the invasion ship's tech. Since you're going to a combat space, you can immediately send all of those troops into battle, and a 4-troop swing into battle can be more than enough to take it down. So it's little interesting surprise plays like that that can really benefit with the ring. And additionally, the ability of the ring to acquire a technology in addition to going to a different space is that you can go and collect spice from, say, the Great Flat. You can get the spice you need for the tech right off of the row and then buy it kind of at a surprise, because a lot of the times when people are playing through rounds, if they're eyeing up a certain tech, they'll look around, see, can anyone else afford this tech? Maybe they put off buying it because they don't think anyone else can. And Rhombur's ability to immediately collect spice and buy the tech right from under them can be game-winning in some scenarios. In one game, I went to the Great Flat, collected like 7 spice, and then immediately used it to buy flagships for a victory point, and it ended up sealing up the game. So that's another interesting use of the ring. And then lastly, just another like use case for the ring. Heading on over to tech negotiation, which already gives you a discount on spice. You can use your ring to get a second discount on the spice, making it a little bit cheaper to acquire techs. And additionally, the tech negotiation and the dreadnought spots both allow you to buy a tech. So if you go there with your ring, you could actually buy 2 techs at once. Sometimes could be relevant. I don't see it's done a ton, but it just opens up more possibilities for your gameplay. So something I thought should be considered. Anything you'd like to add in regard to the Signet Ring ability or any effective uses or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Let's start with my favorite beginning one. This one's training drones. Training drones. So imagine why you fear the beast in combat so much, because his Signet Ring gives you either 1 or 2 troops depending upon his alliance situation, right?
Yeah.
Well, imagine you have the Signet ability of the beast every single round. This is how strong this tech is. When you buy it in the first round, you've basically said, I am the beast, and the beast cannot possibly challenge you in combat at that point, because he only gets his once every 2 rounds. You're getting yours every single round because it's for free. So how do you manage this? There's 2 ways in which you can apply this. The first is by going still suits, and following that move, you go here. This might surprise people because you're spending all your water to get that 3 spice, but imagine most games end around turn 7, turn 8. That 3 spice for 2 water is basically 7 to 8 troops on average. And so if I said to you, would you be willing to spend 3 spice for 8 troops? I'm sure you would jump at it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's insane value.
Yeah, it's insane value. And you get the second benefit, which is to ambush potentially Baron. So in the tournament, I hope to somehow exemplify this at some point, where the Baron goes to Hardy Warriors, and he sends his troops. And the thing is, with Rhombur's play, he has the ability to first put in 1 troop by going to still suits, and then he can add in 2 troops and 1 more for the training drones. So as long as you have a dagger or 2, you have the ability to, by chance, cut off Baron by the kneecap. Now, why is this important? It's because Baron tends to wheel off and get a lot of points in the beginning, so you might want to interrupt his flow. You might say, well, isn't that committing too many troops? Well, not necessarily, because if you're cutting him off, then you're right behind him in position, which means you have a chance of getting the extra bump to get to the Spacing Guild, and you can replenish your troops thereafter. So I like to use this play to cut off Baron at times if they're not careful. So it's a nice ambush play for that. And I would say this is one of the techs that you must go after in the beginning. If you see this and you're not hitting still suits and following up with this, you've given up a lot of value for yourself. That's 8 troops on average per game.
Yep. And just to clarify, with the Great Flat play, you need to go there with your Signet Ring so you can buy training drones with it. I'm sure you could delay it a turn if you don't have it, but that is like the idea of the play of getting in the extra training drones troop. And additionally, the reason the 4 troops is so relevant is because the Baron's ability is called Master Stroke, where if they deploy 4 troops in one action, they can reveal 2 tokens and get bonus bumps. So generally, when the Baron does go in on a combat, they're committing 4 troops. So if you want to have a chance of beating them, you also need to commit like 4 troops. So that's why this is so relevant, because it can be difficult to get 4 troops in at a surprise in the first round if you're not heavily targeting the city spots for the extra troops. So the ability to go to still suits and then the Grey Flat and get 4 troops in still can catch a lot of Barons off guard.
For Vernius, he has a lot of Solari issues just because his Dreadnoughts demand it. Mentat requires it. The Swordmaster High Council, pretty much a lot of the stuff he wants to do requires Solari. So the thing is, a lot of the times you'll be unable to hit Spacing Guild, the Fold Space location, just because of how lucrative that it provides the other parties. So you should be hitting Wealth or Conspire. And the reason for that is, as you hit up to the 3rd track, you stop right there. You don't progress any further. You don't grab that alliance because you're not Beast. You don't need that alliance. And what you're hoping to do is one of these 3 techs come into play, and These techs will, at an opportune moment for you during combat, provide you with either the Solari that you've collected or the bump required to get you a lot of points. So, for instance, if I went to Arakeen with, in this case, let's just say the 2 dreadnoughts you've built over time throughout the game, and the 1 troop that you send in just by going to Arakeen, so that's 10 strength right there. If you cross the line, you get 2 more troops. This is already equal to a Highliner, this 1 play right here, just by spending 2 spice extra. And you've been doing this throughout the entire game anyway. The only difference is you're waiting right up below the line and looking to charge in at the right moment here. Now, it's obviously easier with the mem quarters to achieve this, but if you're wealthy enough, you can try the shuttle fleet play, and you can hit a lot of different combos with that. Like if you're hiding under the Benny Gesserit combo, then you get the extra intrigue, or even just to meet the friendship guide. Now, a lot of people will say, don't you use mem quarters to just achieve the spacing guild? Well, a lot of times you don't really want to hit the shipping track unless you're getting uncontested shipping. That's a whole different story. But if there's 2 other people already on shipping, you're wasting your time. Focus on combat, get your points through combat, and use these methodologies, and it'll be highly beneficial for you. So I would say these 3 intrigues are very, very beneficial for that type of tactic. Now, the next sequence is these techs. So I would categorize these as the auto combat winners. So when people see you acquire these, they basically have to get out of your way in combat. Let's start with this. So when you have this, and you have 2 dreadnoughts to boot, that is a total combat strength of 12. Good luck beating that. That is nearly a Highliner every time you walk into combat, just by even going to Imperial Basin. 4, 4, 4. If you let Vernius get this technology, you basically said, please take all the combats throughout the game. There's no chance, unless there's a million intrigues in your hand, to even come back from that. Artillery serves the same function. It's a little bit more on the surprise side. It depends upon the variance of the daggers, but believe me when I say that artillery does more than its bang for its buck of either 1 spice or 0 spice, depending upon the discount situation. We will go over the card situation later, but I actually value the artillery more than the restricted ordnance if it's acquired earlier. As for water, it's a little bit more obvious. Allows you to hit hardy warriors more often, allows you to go to a research station to sometimes fulfill that 1 spice must flow point that is so elusive for Rhombur. This is one of the bigger plays for Rhombur, that water is so useful for him, because if you're sending in 2 dreadnoughts, 2 troops, that's essentially strength of 12. You're just a little bit shy off of a hardy warrior's, of a Highliner's strength in terms of combat. So the cost effectiveness is not to be doubted. Now, obviously, this and this are victory point conditions. If there's a valuation between these 2, I would say this is much more valuable, simply because there's little your opponents can do about it. This gets everybody on alert, but this also has the ability to give you added benefits here. So, for example, let's start off with this. Imagine you sent in 12 strength for 3 spice and an intrigue. How likely is somebody to commit all their chips in for that? And if they did, they wouldn't feel very good about it. But conversely, for you, if you win this combat, you're getting 1 point, an intrigue, and 3 spice, which is highly lucrative, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, big time.
Yep. So this is one of the better techs, but this is the best tech for the VP situation, because Rhombur will definitely have a lot of access issues in the beginning, or even all the way to the end, and this helps alleviate that stress of action economy, and allows you to chase down one track, usually hardy warriors, but if the Fremen track, but if not the Fremen track, go for the Imperial, just because the Solari situation is highly required for this character. I would say if you can, hit Conspire twice throughout the game. This is something you'll see throughout a lot of my matches. Conspire is a really good spot for Vernius because he's lacking intrigues and he needs the Solari to complete his High Council or his Dreadnoughts. So you might ask, why would I have High Council in this situation where you're already Solari starved? It's because, as I said before, we're looking for a situation where you can buy power cards earlier than anybody. And it leads to better combat results, sometimes Spice Must Flows, or power cards like Jessica to help you filter through other cards that you need. So I actually value High Council more than I do Swordmaster for Rhombur.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Solari you get by going to the Emperor track is so much more valuable because, in general, going for a more combat-oriented strategy, going for this higher water gain, spice economy, you're not going to be going full space early. You're not going to be getting a lot of interstellar shipping going. And usually interstellar shipping is one of the most efficient ways to get a lot of Solari. So if you're not hitting that track as much, Conspire and Wealth become the main sources of Solari for Rhombur.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess we'll move on to some early, mid, end game goals. And we kind of already touched on it a little bit, but I guess we can cover it a little bit more. And we'll start out with the early game here. And we already touched on it, but getting Dreadnoughts early for Rhombur, very, very important. We already talked a little bit about why, but the extra value you get from the strength is better earlier on. And if you look at some of the rewards you can get just by throwing in one troop, not even necessarily winning the combat, you can get a ton of Solari just by getting second and third place. These are two prime examples. There's also Siege of Arakeen. And we already said that Prince Rhombur is going to have a lot of trouble getting Solari because he's not necessarily going interstellar shipping as much. So getting the second place rewards, getting all these extra resources from the combats will enable you to get more Dreadnoughts, enable the High Council seat, which we just said is very important to enable buying the power cards that show up in the row. And eventually it'll enable a Swordmaster in the late game. So a very Solari-starved leader will benefit a lot from these kind of tech cards. And then another thing I like to set up in the early game is getting the spice economy going. Lannister just talked about it with getting wind traps up. But also just going to still suits, it enables to collect a lot of spice, which will enable Highliners plays in the future. It'll enable buying these very high-powered tech cards that Rhombur's so good at buying. And also, it'll enable Hardy Warriors plays, so you can make yourself much more combat ready as the game goes on. Getting 2 troops for 1 water is pretty good value, especially if you have the 2 troops behind in Garrison to get 4 troops in with a single play. Additionally, with that spice economy stuff, if there are cards that show up in the row that give water, stuff like that, also going to be a pretty high priority. In the mid game, we kind of already talked about it. Try to take down some cheap combats and save up resources for those high-level conflict 3s. Very important to have the resources set up to grab these double victory points in the end because Rhombur's not a rush leader. He's not going to finish the game in 5 or 6 rounds because he's not pushing the influence tracks as much. So being able to catch up in the late game by winning these huge combats is very important. So saving up your spice so you can go Highliner and saving up your resources so maybe you can buy that late game flagship to get some extra troops in and get the victory point is going to be very important. And then, yeah, I kind of just talked about the end game. Winning end game combats, going Highliner, finishing off some of the 2 victory point friendships, especially if you don't have spy satellites available, getting 2 of these. It's going to be very hard to win a game just going combat if you don't have these victory points from the friendships with each of the tracks. So also very important. And if you're close to an alliance, we already talked about how Fremen and Emperor tracks are very good potential alliances that Rhombur can go for. Also just finishing up those alliances as well. Anything to add with regard to the different goals of the early, mid, late game with Rhombur?
Yeah, absolutely. So with regards to the beginning, it's very important, especially in, let's say, this combat for skirmish. You're trying to aim for the second place finish, which is usually 2 or 3 troop commitment in this fight. So it's important to try and aim for second place as much as you can in this situation, because that odd number Solari, that extra 1 Solari, might not seem significant, but that's an extra action that you save there, because you'll essentially go to here and hit the Dreadnought, and it will allow you to enter combat in the next round with that same turn, as opposed to having to wait a full round of you acquiring that Solari and then going to get the Dreadnought and then waiting another round to deploy it. So that's why it's important for you to commit to that second round position. Now, the one time I would not do that is if someone is in position to cash out, then you don't need to commit as hard. So what I mean by that, let's say your third position behind Yuna. Yuna would typically go to smuggling on her first turn in the second position, and then she would simply cash out to get her 13 Solari. So you only need to get that 2 Solari for third place, because she's going to get you that 1 Solari extra. That's a very important identification to realize. Basically, if the second person in position behind you is going to have access and is likely to cash out on smuggling, then you only need to get that 2 Solari for yourself. It could be a wealth play or anything like that. You don't need to go as hard in those types of situations. But otherwise, if you don't have that opportunity, go for the second place. It's very important for your tempo in terms of progression. The other thing I should mention is when you buy cards, you need to know what type of accesses that you have. So in this respect, let's say you've been buying a lot of Imperial cards and Fremen cards, such as Leah Kynes or Spice Hunter. Those have access to the Imperial and Fremen. So that's what you've been trying to do. So that means you're missing access to the Benny and the Facing Guild. So how do you make up for this? Very likely in the entire game, at most you're going to be cashing out on shipping just once. When you ship, you need to collect and get the bump on the Benny or the spacing to complete your friendship, because you're not likely to be cutting cards very often unless circumstances come up and you're trying to aim for a Chone directorship, for example, and you're not hitting full space that frequently unless you've been fortunate enough to grab all that spice and you have just dived into combat with Highliner. So it's very important to use that shipping bump as an opportunity for you to hit the less frequently obtained access for those, because those are typically non-combative positions for access. So I would say that is one of the more important elements of realizing the access cards that you have and utilizing the regular cards to offset that lack of access.
Okay. So that's a nice discussion of the different goals as you progress through the game. And I think it's also worth noting some other early game move combinations. We already talked about the possibility of going still suits to an early great flat, so you can get the spice you need to buy training drones if it's available in the row. And we already talked about if a combat has Solari as a reward, how important it is to get a troop in there so you can try to win some of that. But let's say the opening combat rewards are just spice for second and third place, and you don't necessarily get Solari off of it. Another good way for Rhombur to afford the Solari to get their Dreadnought early, smuggling for 1 Solari and the bump, and then you can come back around to wealth for 2 Solari. That gives you the 3 Solari you need to get the Dreadnought with your first action the next round, keeping that tempo that Lannister was just talking about. And then for the 4th action the next round, you can send that Dreadnought into combat by going to a combat space. So I think that's always like a nice default backup option in case the combats or the situation isn't working out in that favor. And additionally, with Prince Rhombur's ring ability, getting the discount on the spice, if Rhombur goes to tech negotiation with his ring, that's a 2 spice discount on any of the techs in the row, which can be huge because it allows Rhombur to get any of the 2 cost techs with 1 action. So they could grab a super early Mnemic Film, a very early Sonic Snoopers, generally not getting troop transports, but also wind traps. We just talked about how good that is. So if there is a good tech in the row, you can also just do a single action to grab that right away. Any other early game combinations you think are worth talking about?
Yeah, there's one other thing that should be mentioned is the combative part of how this works. With this character, he takes some time to recover between combats, so you cannot go into every single combat and commit all your troops. You can commit your dreadnoughts periodically to get the secondary rewards, But the idea behind how this character works is in the first 4 rounds, you're likely to enter into one combat, recover on the next, and then enter in. If you manage to get some intrigues from Carthag that allow you to go to multiple combats, let's say 2 or 3 in a row, you're likely going to face a lot of resistance at the table. If you've won 2 to 3 combats in a row, take 2 turns as a break, unless it's a VP combat, such as the 2 that you see here. If it's something like a bump combat where you're simply getting 2 intrigues and a bump, or if it's 3 spice and an intrigue, you can just skip that, and the following one after that too. As long as it's not a VP combat directly, take the appropriate amount of time to recover, and that amount of recovery should be based off of how often you've been active. 1 in, 1 out, or 2 in and 2 out. So that's the type of flow, unless you have something like Gurney Halleck. If you're in Gurney Halleck, you can go in every combat and you won't face any resistance, I would say.
Okay. So I think next we can move on to how does Rhombur usually win games? There are a couple of broad strategies that different leaders can fall into, whether or not they're going high persuasion, getting spice miss flows, whether they're rushing the different influence tracks to get their victory points, or going combat, or some other combinations of interesting strategies. Where do you think Rhombur is getting most of his points and finishing out games?
So for him, it's definitely the majority of his points being from combat. You're basically using the tempo of the axis cards to get your half bumps, and then the other action in to get the points. So your first action, your first 3 to 4 turns might be slower because you're acquiring the 2 dreadnoughts. But when you have an opportunity to use an axis card, please use it. It's very important to utilize those axis cards when they're available to you, because essentially every action of yours with an axis card, such as diplomacy, for instance, is giving you half a point. This is totally different from other leaders such as Leto or Baron, who they charge up the ladder so quickly that sometimes they overshoot the top, and it ends up not even translating to half a point per action. But with Rhombur, for sure, if you're doing 2 actions on, say, secrets, or 2 actions on wealth, that's basically half a point per action. So with that type of situation, you're looking to do usually a setup play and then the axis play. So if you've been buying cards that are pretty decent with the High Council plays, as I mentioned before, your first action might be, say, to grab the Dreadnought, and you have 2 options at that point. You either hit Carthag if it's available, or an axis point of your point. So if you see that the combat is of little consequence, such as this combat or this combat, it's not a priority to get the secondary resources. It helps supplement you. You can hit the axis points first, and then if you determine that you need it, you can go for this combat as a secondary ward. But it is also very important for you to use those diplomacies when you see them, because if you give that up, you're essentially giving up half a point in that instance, because we're playing it pretty high efficiency in terms of 2 actions, and you can't afford to give up one of those 2 actions for something that doesn't give you half a point. What is an example of something that isn't an axis card that might get you more value than half a point? I would say if there's a great deal of spice on one of the spice locations. So, for example, if you saw 5 spice or greater, this is an opportunity that is greater than the axis cards, because it gets you access to the higher tier tactiles that can help you gain more than the half a point that we had described. This literally gives you a full point and a lot more combat potential. And for Rhombur, this is pretty much 2 to 3 points easy. It's very rare for us to hit all the tracks. That is the difficulty with this character. If you're if you're playing this character and you see a plans within plans or a corner of the market, you shouldn't be happy about it. In fact, you should try to get Sonic Snoopers. You're not likely going to hit those bonuses. That's not this character's forte, unless you hit some really good cards like Jessica, where it happens to work out that way. In a game with Orski, I think it was the one with Black Shadow and Pidge, I had the opportunity between Imperium Ceremony and the Great Worms. So that's the 6 daggers or the 3 persuasion. This is the part of recognizing the table strength. If there's another beast at the table, during that game, I would have definitely chosen the worms for the daggers. But because there was no other combat capable individual in there, I chose Imperium Ceremony over it because my hybrid strategy was going to work out since nobody else had combat potential to challenge me, effectively anyway. So during the course of that game, you'd have seen that I hit 2 Spice Must Flows, and that ended up being the deciding winner of that particular thing, without me even requiring the 6 additional swords. So recognizing the table strength in terms of the leader capabilities and what they've been acquiring as cards is very important in determining if you're fully loading yourself with daggers or giving yourself hybrid cards like Piter or Jessica or Imperium Ceremony to help supplement the 1 or 2 Spice Must Flows you might hit at the end of the game. So I would say that's one of the most important things to understand.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that's very well said. It's so hard getting victory points in this game. You only need 10 to win. So you need to take every opportunity you can. And if you can afford to skimp on the combat-based cards, like you said, so you can get a little bit more persuasion to maybe get that Spice Must Flow right at the end, I think that's a very heads-up way to play the game.
Yep, absolutely.
So next up, I think we should dive into some of the cards that are very good for Rhombur, something you'd want to go after if you sit in the Imperium row. There are always going to be cards that are S tier that you should get regardless, like Lady Jessica or Liet Kynes maybe, or Chome Directorship, but we're going to dive more into the cards that we think are specifically good for Rhombur. So for the card synergy portions, I tried to break it up into different categories of cards, not necessarily giving you every one, but thinking about what the cards give you, the goal they help you meet as Rhombur, and if you see other cards that kind of fit into that niche, you know they're also good for you. And the first category of cards I decided to go for were cards that set you up for a good spice economy early on. I already talked about how important it is as a combat leader, as a leader that's more dependent on technologies that require spice, combats that require, or highliners that require spice, or conspiring to get the Solar you need. Getting spice is important, so I just wanted to highlight a few of the high-value cards that will enable you to just get that economy going a little bit earlier. Water Peddlers, very cheap and very good for getting your water game going. Water obviously being required to hit spaces like Great Flat, Haga Basin. It gives you a water on buy and a water every time you either discard it, trash it, or reveal it. So that's a very efficient way to get water, because usually you can go to Still Suits, but it ends up being a relatively low value spot. And if you can avoid it and go to higher value spots, remember we need to get Dreadnoughts and stuff like that. Water Peddler enables you to cut out that step, which can be incredibly potent. Still Suit Manufacturer also gives you some water. Stitched Horror as well. Very, very good card. Gives you water, but also gives you the Tleilax Suit bump, so you can get victory points from this row a little bit easier. Satellite Band, an absolutely awesome card. It lets you discard a card to get a spice and a water as well. Gives you some good access to the guild and the Fremen track. And then also Carry All. Lets you double the base spice you get from going to a collect. So if you go to Great Flat, for example, in this scenario, you would collect 5 plus 3 more spice because you double the base spice. 8 spice for a single action is absolutely insane. And you can already see that it's going to enable you to get the insanely powerful flagships, enable you to go to highliners. So there are a lot of cards that kind of fit into this niche. These were ones that I wanted to specifically call out. But yeah, anything to add, Lannister?
Absolutely. I think wise man named Orski one time mentioned on his cast that this was a great card. So why is this a great card? What Orski mentioned was great in terms of the 8 spice here. But he also mentioned earlier that, hey, that bonus 3 spice, this is consistently getting you 2 spice while giving you better access. So uh, it speaks to his level of research and knowledge. I actually value this more than carry all, to be honest, because it gives you the access point, and it'll likely give you the 2 spice too, because you're hitting the Imperial side of this. And if you really need to, it'll give you the Bene Gesserit to cut cards when you need to cut cards, which is highly valuable for that instance.
Yeah, and you don't have to pay 2 water to get the bonus spice. For carry all at maximum value, if you're going to the Great Flat, you're spending 2 water to get a bonus of 3 spice. This one, you can go to better spots and you get 2 spice. So you're only giving up 1 spice for saving 2 water and better access. So completely agree.
Yep, absolutely. Now, this card also gets you spice that you need. I actually love this card so much for Rhombur, just because, as I said, he really highlights on that Imperial track a lot. So you're buying up Imperial access cards, and it'll give you a bump of your choice. And as I mentioned before, there are certain tracks that are just so elusive for us, because we can't afford to go to secrets or selective breeding if we're trying to win combats. So this helps alleviate that stress. It'll get you the bump where you need to get it, as long as you have an Imperial or a Facing Guild card, which shouldn't be too difficult if you've been aiming for the cards that we said you should be. On top of that, this obviously is another great card. Gives you that Imperial access, and Spice Must Flows are easily purchased through this. So I would say in that kind of categorization, these 3 cards are what I would add to that fold.
Okay, yeah. Guild Banker is absolutely awesome card, especially for Rhombur because of the access it gives you, but also we kind of talked about maybe needing that one last Spice Must Flow to put you over to end the game, or to win the game if you're going into the end game from someone else. And being able to buy a Spice Must Flow for 6 persuasion is so much easier than buying it for 9. So very, very powerful card in Rhombur's hands.
Absolutely. Yeah, 6 is definitely something much more manageable than the 9, especially if you're trying to do combat, and it's hard doing combat while getting 9 persuasion in your hand, as you would very well know.
Oh yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next general category of cards that I'd like to discuss, and that would be cards that help you get dreadnoughts. We already talked about how Solari can be a real bottleneck for Prince Rhombur to afford the 3 Solari to get his dreadnoughts going early. So any cards that can give you some bonus Solari are going to be huge. Or not necessarily give you bonus Solari, but in this case, it's going to be getting the actual dreadnought itself. So Ix-Guild Compact, absolutely insane card for Rhombur. Being able to get a dreadnought just for discarding 2 troops is huge value. And it has access to the guild track. So you can go to Highliner on a turn, discard 2 cards, and since it's a combat space, you can send that dreadnought you got in right away. So awesome combat value you get from that. And the discard ability, or trashing or revealing ability of getting 2 negotiators down to discount future techs, also really good because Rhombur's so good at buying techs without having to spend an additional action to get through the tech negotiation spot. So Ix-Guild Compact, absolutely insane. Full scale assault, very expensive. It may be hard to buy as Rhombur because he does end up going for lower persuasion cards, but if you can get it, it gives you a free dreadnought right off the bat, which is really good. It gives you 2 bonus troops when you play it, and it gives you extra daggers if you have dreadnoughts in, which, as Rhombur, you usually should have 1 or 2 dreadnoughts into combats that you're pushing heavily for. So, also very good. And then, along the lines of just giving you Solari to be able to afford, there are a lot of cards that give you Solari in this game, so I'm not going to highlight everyone. But Organ Merchants, being able to spend a specimen to get 4 Solari as an action is very potent. If you look at Conspire, it costs you 4 spice to get 5 Solari. Of course, you're getting extra benefits as well, including troops and an intrigue card. But if you're really just eyeing up the Solari to get that early High Council seat, get those early dreadnoughts going, this can do it very efficiently for you. And it has decent access, so cards that give you Solari or just give you the dreadnought right away are going to be especially powerful as Rhombur. Anything to add, Lannister?
Absolutely. This is quite an overlooked card. I would say a lot of the times people think of it as a shipping card, but this is actually highly significant for the Dreadnought play. A lot of the times you're wasting an action here, and then you need to go to another combat space to do this. This card helps you do what you intended to do, to do the Lord's work and smashing combat as often as possible. You go here, and as long as you have level 2 Spacing Guild access, it'll allow you to deploy your Dreadnought as well as 2 from the garrison so that no location is safe. Everyone thinks that they've blocked you on the city accesses. No problem. Use this card, you dive right in, you're good to go. And now you actually have more opportunities to hit these access points because you've been fearful all along of going here and not being able to deploy to get the secondary or the primary rewards. This card allows you to go and get your rewards as well as get your access points as much as possible. So this is one of the MVP cards. Don't scoff at that 1 Solari because a lot of the times when you hit wealth, you're like, 1 Solari short. This supplements that 1 Solari, and it'll come into play a lot more often than you would think. So that's why I think this is another card that is very useful for Rhombur. It reveals for that Solari, and there are combats or opportunities for card cuts that allow you to get another 4 Solari, which is very significant. As Orsky mentioned, the normal way of getting 5 Solari is the Conspire play, and there's not always 4 spice for you to spare in that situation. So in this instance, that is another MVP card. Now, obviously, Opulence is another great card. We don't want to forget about that. It's a great power card, but it supplements Rhombur in all ways. I would say if it is the early to mid game, so let's say up to turn 5, utilize this for the Solari. But by turn 6 and onwards, you're trying to save up your Solari for the point in this instance. So be flexible with this. Think of it as a transitional card. This is very powerful in the beginning to get your engine flowing. Do not run into the trap of going, I'm just going to straight up print out Opulence points by revealing and getting 6 Solari. That is only after you've achieved your goals, which is the 2 Dreadnoughts and the Axis point Friendship or Alliance in this instance. When you achieved all of that, then you can think about Opulence points. This is not to be characterized as a one-trick pony only card. So that's what I would say are the important money cards in this situation.
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad you said that about Opulence, too, because I feel like I see that all the time. You see the victory point there. It is hard to get victory points in this game, so you kind of want to get the full victory point value out of this every time you see it. But getting your Solari engine going, being able to go to Wealth with Opulence and getting 5 Solari with 1 free action, not having to pay Spice for Conspire, for example, so insanely strong. Helps you get your engine going so you can get more points down the road. Always stay flexible with this card, like you said. Completely agree. So the next general category of cards that I want to talk about are cards that help with passive influence gain. We kind of already talked about how Rhombur doesn't want to waste a lot of actions going to the different influence spaces because he needs to get his Dreadnoughts online. He needs to go to a combat space to get those Dreadnoughts in to get the combat rewards. And if he's not getting a Swordmaster until later, it becomes harder to add in those extra actions to get the friendships with the different factions. So any card that gives you passive bumps with the different factions are going to be huge. I'll just highlight 2 here. There are a lot of other cards in the game that will give you passive bumps. Web of Power is pretty much strong in every scenario. Pretty much every leader is going to want to get this just because revealing for 1 bump is so powerful. It saves you an entire action pretty much just on reveal, which is huge. And then Chom Directorship as well. It's really good because it helps with 2 goals. First of all, it gives you a bump with every single faction. And if you think about having to go to each of those faction spaces to get this bump, this is saving you 4 actions worth of turns. And if you don't have those bumps already, this is basically equivalent to 2 victory points because you need 2 bumps with each faction to get a victory point. So it kind of gets you halfway there with all of them. And additionally, the reveal's not even that bad. Of course, it sucks that it doesn't have any agent action, so it can be a little bit inflexible in your hand, but revealing for 3 Solari, Dreadnoughts also cost 3 Solari, so this can help fuel your Solari engine as well. So any of these cards that help with that passive gain. In the Shadows is another good example that I didn't pull out. I don't know if you have that in your supply, but any other cards you'd like to highlight here, Lannister?
Speaking of the devil, I have got it equipped here, so just give me a second while I pull it all out. These are all the cards that I would say add to that. So when you see these, how does that highlight this point? So, for instance, we talked about action compression in terms of doing many things with the limited actions that we're doing. So how does that help? You go to highline with this card, and you chuck this card and this card, and what does that do for you? Gets you a Benny bump, and it might complete your shipping track bump to get you that extra point, and more cards to follow. So let's kind of line this up. So let's say you only have 2 troops in the garrison at this point, and you just highlined with this card, and you dropped off these 2 cards. You get 5 more troops. So that's already 5 troops extra here. One too many. And then, if you were at the level 2 shipping, you've just dropped this down. That's 2 more troops. So, you get a bump. We talked about how the Imperial Alliance is very important, right? If you've been doing your job, it's another 2 troops for crossing the threshold of the Imperial Alliance and getting the Emperor Alliance bonus, which is 2 troops. And so suddenly, with one action, you've gotten the combat win, which hopefully is a 2-point combat, gets you a point over here, and you dump this to get another half a point or full point because you've been trying to complete this throughout the actions. So these are all the extra added bonuses that are very important. So I'd say for Rhombur, this is one of the most important cards. If you see this, you need to take it, even if you don't have other supplementary cards as of yet, because there are plenty of other opportunities, such as holo projectors. This can help you supplement that combination, or cards like Jameis. So, for instance, you go into combat, even for still suits or hardy warriors, you get to kill a card of your choice. This will be that choice at the opportune moment and produce you the result that we had just discussed. So, oh, I forgot, when you delete those 2 cards, you also get a Dreadnought. So imagine that play, where you did 1 hardy warrior action with a barely minimalistic garrison, and now you suddenly have well over 25 strength in one fell swoop.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the level of action compression and efficiency you can get going, especially with these unload cards that give you their abilities by getting rid of them, combined with trashing cards. There are cards that will let you discard 2 trash as well, which would be a double bump with Freighter Fleet, double bump within the shadows. So there are a lot of awesome combinations you can get. So just keeping an eye out for these different card combinations that give you passive rewards with a relatively low price to pay in terms of actions you have to spend is very important when you're shopping in the Imperium row. The next category of cards I want to talk about, these are going to be your combat-oriented cards. And these are going to be cards that give you bonuses that help out with more than one of these, and some of these will help out with more than one of the goals. So let me just give you the examples, for example. So all of these are very powerful combat cards, and we talked about Rhombur being a combat-oriented leader, so cards like all of these give a ton of daggers on reveal. Treachery actually just gives you 2 troops that you can deploy to the combat, but they also help out with additional goals as well. We kind of already talked about how important it is to set up a spice economy. Stilgar gives you water when you play it somewhere and has decent access, and Worm Riders gives you 2 spice. We already talked about the value that getting 2 spice from a card is. And late game, when you're trying to win those heavy combats, getting all of these extra swords is just insane. Additionally, Imperial Bashar getting 1 extra dagger for every one you reveal on a turn. This can add up to huge, huge combat reveals that people just don't expect, especially if you've been building your deck around this. And God, let alone if you committed to artillery early on, getting 2 extra daggers for every dagger card you have is just broken in some scenarios. Treachery also helps out with multiple goals. We talked about how difficult it can be to get the friendships with the different tracks. Getting a bonus bump with them with 1 action can be huge. This is a victory point when you play it, and it gives you a little bit of additional power in the combat. And Lannister, I know you love Gunthopter, so I'll let you explain the sheer combat value that Gunthopter brings to the table.
Absolutely. It's one of the best cards. If you're going combat deck and you don't get Gunthopter, you are doing a major disservice. Let me explain how this works. So, you've been hiding all along. You've not been doing anything but hitting the axis tracks here. And so you're missing out on opportunity for combat. Well, guess what? This guy just brought in 5 combat strength for you. just like that. 5 combat strength in the first 4 rounds essentially means you've won or gotten second place for little to no effort, because you've been able to hit your access points, which are difficult to hit, but at the same time without having to hit the city accesses that don't provide you that half a bump in that scenario. So this card is definitely S tier for a combat individual. I know there's a lot of people who don't like this card. I agree. If this is a persuasion deck, it hurts it. But for a combat deck, it is the creme de la creme. Don't avoid buying this unless you're a hybrid build or a full persuasion build. This is a card that you cannot give up on, because what this essentially means is you can dictate at any point when you need the extra troops to go in to fulfill your combat win, or to get you the secondary rewards when other people are too gun shy about it. And at the worst case scenario, even if you don't send troops in, people will overcommit because of this card, because it's an extra 5 swords you need to deal with. That's nearly 3 cubes that other people need to commit just to overcome this one card of yours. And it might not even be in your hand at the time. So think of it that. How hard is it to get 3 extra cubes in one combat? And if they use those resources to do this, they are basically no longer a threat for the next turn or two, because they need to replenish the supply that you just brought in or had the capability of bringing in. So I'm sure I've turned around a lot of people on this. I won't name the individual, but I beat him with 4 in a row combats using this one card, and it totally turned him around. I will say that this is one of my favorite combat cards, and I even have a special place for it. I nicknamed it. So.
Oh, what's the nickname?
The Helicopter Joe.
Okay.
Helicopter Joe for American hero G.I. Joe. So just to add a little spice to this quality card.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So speaking of which, there's one card I wanted to mention that is often overlooked. This card. This is a super powerful card. A lot of people will tell me this is a garbage card, and I actually want to exemplify this. If you look into hidden assets, there's a particular video for the tournament right now where there was in Group A with CJ, an individual chose to get this card, and I basically listed that they would win a lot of early game combats as a result of this. So it was Beast in particular, not just Rhombur, who was aiming at the Imperial Alliance. And so it was hard for people to remember this card because it has such a bad reputation and it doesn't really do anything except swords, limited swords or a lot of swords. So when you're hitting this track and you're going up on this, no one's suspecting you. And lo and behold, in that particular combat, he only sent in 1 troop. It was worth 7 daggers total. 5 from this, 1 from the cube. It won the day for him, and it won multiple fights. This can ambush people early on. It'll win you 2 to 3 fights minimum. By the mid to late game, people will finally recognize this card and start to do blocking plays, but it will already have done its damage because it's won you 2 to 3 victories that you didn't deserve to begin with, just because it got you 5 extra swords. So this is a sleeper card. I will live by it. I will buy it a lot of the times if I have the ability to buy it.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was a big Imperial Shock Trooper hater. I don't think I've ever, I still may have never bought this card from the Imperium row, just because of how bad I thought it was. And my thinking as to why I thought it was so bad is because you have to commit to the Emperor track in order to get that bonus. And when I'm thinking about this card, I was thinking mostly about endgame conflicts. And when you think about the value you can get out of this early game, like you were saying, you want to be going to wealth anyway to get the Solari to fuel different stuff. So you're kind of taking out 2 birds with 1 stone. And yeah, the reputation, people will not remember you have this card. This is not a card you keep track of like Treachery or Worm Riders or something like that. So yeah, I still haven't played with it, but I look forward to getting a spin on it.
Absolutely. And again, I'd refer you to see that game with Group A with CJ in it. It'll fully exemplify how I think J Shocks was the name of the individual. utilize that card and to great effect. Uh,
Yeah.
Finally, this card, I would say, is a great card for you. We talked about action compression. A lot of the times, you'll see me hit these zones a lot of the times and ignore combat completely, because this allows me the ability to shove in all the troops at the end of it. This is a rapid mobilization on a stick. You need to buy this card if you are a Rhombur, because it gets you one get out of jail free round for combat. Because a lot of the times you're going to be in a situation where you need to hit the access points to get the points, but you also need to get into combat and you have to choose between one or the other. This is basically saying, don't worry about it. You go and do what you need to do. I'll hold the fort down for you in the end. So this also saves you from something like a desert ambush that kicks out your dreadnoughts and whatnot. So whenever you have this card, it is very important for you to, at the very first stage, hit Mentat. The Mentat is very important because this allows you to get behind everybody, and then they don't see your full combat strength until the final blow. This is very important. Do not miss that sequence. Do not be greedy and go, well, I need to hit this access point or that access point. Grab the Mentat first as a general sequence of events, because you need to be the last one to do the combat entry, and that is a very important sequence to remember when utilizing this card to great effect.
Yeah, and it's such a nightmare to play around too. This is a card that you need to keep track of if someone else buys it. And I played a game recently where I knew they had it in the deck. They had this huge garrison. And I just had to keep throwing in troops, even though they have nothing actually in the combat, because I know, let's say it's a 10 card deck and they just redrew. They have like a 50-50 chance of drawing this thing. So you don't have to use it either. So you can force people to overcommit into combats. This card can be absolutely nightmare in the end game. Agreed. Really good card.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the last category of card that I want to talk about, and this is just going to be Exceed Engineer. Cards that give you a straight up combat point are going to be insane. We already talked about how Rhombur is a tech oriented leader. Very easy for them to get 3 techs, especially if they're buying some of the cheaper techs with their ring. You can get an artillery and a wind traps like pretty quickly with little effort, and being able to reveal this for a victory point at the end is just huge. And it enables you to buy more techs if you want to. You probably won't need to play this card too much with your ring, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility in that regard. But this is pretty much a victory point, so usually worth grabbing if it's out there.
Yep, I agree with that sentiment. I would say the only time that might be a difference maker in terms of utilizing it to buy techs or not buying techs, if this is in the row and you're in tier 3, it is 100% okay to give up this combat point or this reveal point to take the tier 3 win. It's an important distinction to make, because a lot of the times when you're in tier 3 conflicts, the combat needs at least 20 strength or more to essentially securitize that 2 VP. If you're sitting at, say, 14 to 18, you're in a dangerous zone. And this helps supplement that. You need that extra 8 strength that it provides, and it can really throw people for a loop, especially since if you played your Signet the first time around for, say, Mentat, they'll go, oh, he doesn't have a bullet in the chamber anymore. Well, bam, this changes everything.
Next up, we kind of already talked about some of the great techs that are available for Rhombur, but I guess we can just touch them on them again really quick, of the techs that we think are the highest value to Rhombur, and what we're usually eyeing up, especially in the opening tech row, for example, if we play differently around them.
There was one thing I overlooked in terms of the techs. There's actually one tech that is often overlooked. It's Sonic Snoopers. A lot of the times, Rhombur lacks the number of intrigues capable of getting the endgame VPs, because as you know, there's a lot of endgame VPs that add a lot of value to you. Unfortunately for Rhombur, he often is very upfront with the points he acquires outside of spy satellites. So Sonic Snoopers is that opportunity for when you've hit Carthag and secrets maybe once or twice. It allows you to cycle up those intrigues for combat, as well as for the hidden VPs that you so desire, or even the extras, the access bumps that you're kind of missing. And it's at a very low cost of 2 spice. So I would say this is one of the major ones that you need to look out for. It's so valuable. Sometimes I'll even go out of my way to grab it in the beginning of the game just because of how much value it adds to other people. If there's a Baron in the game, please do not allow him to get this. This is basically saying to Baron, please get as many endgame VPs as you want, because his ring just does so much value with that type of thing. You need to, as Rhombur, deny that from him. Like you denied him with the training drones. This is the second denial play. You see this, you grab it with the ring, deny Baron all day long with that. Yes, I'm a Baron hater, but it comes with the territory as Rhombur as well. So that is that. Artillery, another one you need to snag as soon as possible. The sooner you get it, the easier it is to deck build around it and to build up your combat strategy. By the time you've implemented 4 combat cards, such as the Jesuit Sisters or Jameis, for example, just 4 is enough to supplement you to win every single combat, because you'll have 4 cards and 2 daggers, and hopefully you can cut some cards along the way that aren't as useful. I would say if you have artillery, cut out the deserts and the reconnaissance first, leave in the daggers until you have some good quality dagger cards like Bashir or Bashar, then you can eliminate the regular daggers for other persuasion or access cards. Wind traps, another quality one. This is going to help supplement you to buy powerful cards by hitting research station if there's powerful cards to access in the beginning, or it will supplement your fighting capabilities round by round by hitting hardy warriors all the time. This is something that should be a 2-for-1 situation. You should try to get 4 spice fully loaded, or the discounts that you've got with the from the Signet Ring. And what you're supposed to do with this is to use your agent to go to High Council and hit that to get the High Council and pay the 4 spice on top to acquire it. This is very important course of order, because it saves you that action having to go to tech negotiations and the council, the High Council position. If you can't do it, sometimes you'll have to forego this. I know a lot of people will say, you need to get this ASAP. Be patient. Patience will save you a lot of time and trouble, because if you don't be efficient with your actions, it will cost you dearly. The action compression for this character is of paramount, and you need to do that in that particular order. If you simply go tech negotiations, you will cost yourself that one action, and it will cost you further down the road of access points or spice must flow or any number of things. So I would say that is a very important thing to know about that. This you can pretty much use for any type of situation. Save up the spice, even go to tech negotiations. This gives you 2 to 3 points. If you want to be action inefficient, this is something you can do. It's fine. Nothing to worry about there, because you've saved essentially 6 or 7 turns by buying this absurdly powerful technology. This one, very, very deadly in the hands of Rhombur. You can, as your last action, go into a combat and then buy it and blow up the Dreadnought. This is something that's very akin to what Rhombur should be doing. You'll see that a lot of times I play it, I have to grab it directly. It's because a lot of people try to intercept me before it happens, but if they're lacking resources, or if they don't have that ability to grab it or go there effectively, you can essentially go into any combat square and commit 3 spice with your Dreadnought, and you'll be able to get points easy as pie. That's the way you're supposed to play it, trying to grab the tech as you have the Dreadnought. So you can kind of save up for it, for those surprise moments, to get that extra point. This one, you can try and complete Spacing Guild if you're in second position. If you're not in second position, I would say try and buy it as soon as possible to bump the Imperial side of things, simply because you want the Emperor Alliance as quickly as possible, or sitting just below the line to do the setup play. Don't leave this out there for long. Everybody wants this. Leto definitely wants this. Tessia definitely wants this. Baron definitely wants this. do not give them that opportunity to save their time and options. You take it from them as soon as possible. Flagship doesn't need to be spoken of. It's just a big gun. Use the big gun whenever you can.
And some other notables. We already talked about training drones, but the ability to get this early, get 1 million basically free troops in throughout the game. It can easily be 6 or 7 free troops. 2 extra combat power is just insane value. Mnemonic Film, we kind of already talked about how persuasion can be a limiter in a Prince Rhombur deck because you're going for more swords. So getting that 1 extra persuasion to help you buy better cards can be especially relevant. And maybe it can put you just over the edge to get a Spice with Slow in the end game. So also very good with Rhombur, I think. Troop transports isn't going to be super relevant most of the time because Rhombur is usually not going for the shipping track. We talked about invasion ships being good to get as you're going to a combat space, so you can send those troops in right away. And Hollow Projector is just a generally very good tech. It's not specifically good for Rhombur, but being able to improve the consistency of your hand by discarding one of your bad cards and drawing a card is really good, especially if you're getting those dump cards like, what is it, Freighter Fleet, that you can get free shipping bumps from. And then the last one I want to talk about, Shuttle Fleet. If you can get this early with Rhombur, it is awesome value for him. We talked about how it's annoying getting the bumps already. So getting 2 bumps just for going and getting Shuttle Fleet is really good for 6 Spice. And then if you get this early, getting 2 Solari every single round, that's one of the big conflicts with Rhombur Vernius partly solved because now you don't have to go out of your way to get Solari as often. This can help fuel that background Solari you'll need for your Dreadnoughts, for your High Council seat, for your eventual Sword Master. So just wanted to highlight those as well. I guess Chomarchy can also be good just because you're going to be a little bit more starved for entry cards as Rhombur. But
Let's say that the Chomarchy purchase is quite important too, but only at the end phase, turn 6, turn 7. Buying it too early is going to be detrimental for you because a lot of the times you don't need the combat cards to win the day. If you have Dreadnoughts, you're supposed to take the wins anyway, so that's kind of a wasted effort on that end. So it's a great technology to buy, but early on, I'd say avoid it for the time being. When you hit turn 6, turn 7, that becomes one of the MVP cards because, as I said, a lot of your points are up front, and you need to make that tie break because a lot of people are going to be hiding points behind you, and you're going to look scary, and people are going to try and take your alliance before they realize that, oh, actually Leto's in the lead, and now you're stuck in a tie break situation. This will break that tie. So I would say it's important to grab this tech when you're able to, but the more important thing is to grab it at the turn 6, turn 7 phase, because if you spend your spice too early, you are missing out on the opportunity to supplement your other goals that we talked about in terms of these types of technologies that we had discussed.
okay, I think that's a good wrap up of the techs. Any other general thoughts or tips that we didn't cover that you think are important?
I would say that this technology, the disposal facility, is highly useful if and only if you have certain cards like Freighter Fleet or basically the type of offload type of effects that's highly useful. If you have Esmertuic, Freighter Fleet, Exguild Compact, those type of cards, this is golden for you. You need to get those action efficient bumps whenever you can, and in those niche moments, this will be very useful for that. And watch out for that. If you have 2 to 3 of those cards, this then becomes a purchase that is worth your time because it can get you those passive bumps that we talked about are highly coveted for Rhombur because of his combat desires.
Yep, and that's because you can reveal it and then trash it right after your reveal to get basically the effect twice in a row, which can be a big surge of power.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. The next step, when do you choose this leader based on the Imperium row, techs that are in the row, maybe other leaders that have been chosen?
I would say that's very difficult for Rhombur to thrive in situations where there are costs that are above 5. So let's here, you can see this example here. In this situation, these are all great techs, but you need to have techs that are 4 or below to help you thrive in the beginning to mid game. So a lot of people will be a little bit baffled by this thing. Hey, this is one of the greatest techs for Rhombur, right? Well, it is great, but this is usually, for me anyway, an end game that I use in typical fashion, unless I've suddenly gotten fortuitous and I've gotten Space and Guild access, and I can hit shipping all the time. This is one of those money tiles for the VP conflicts, but outside of that, I try and save this till the very end or use it to deny other players from utilizing it. So in the beginning, you're starved of spice. You should have at least one technology that is 3 or lower, and the premium ones that we had discussed about are all the following. Here, here, and this is the golden one, buy satellites. You go and get that as soon as possible. As soon as you acquire this, saves you all the time. You can keep going combat till the end of time. But these, by and large, sorry, forgot to add these two. These are the techs that you need to see on the row before you decide that it's okay to choose Rhombur. Now, am I going to sit here and say I've never chosen Rhombur unless these had showed up? No, that's not true. But if you're in the process of learning this high difficulty character, you need to give yourself some breathing room, because this character, while strong, is also a very high skill character. You need to manage yourself in terms of what position you actually want to win in combat and the action efficiency that you're going through. And so you need to give yourself some leeway and advantage of getting tech tiles. If you avoid tech tiles for several turns in a row, you're going to feel it. It's going to feel like a blank slate card of a leader. So I would say these are the ones that you need to see on the road before you can get comfortable in the very beginning of using this character.
Yeah, unfortunately, this represents like half of the ticks, so you should usually be able to get a Rhombur game out if you really want to. Obviously, there are scenarios where you can low roll the ticks, but additionally, is there any dependence you think on opening turn order? Like, would you be less likely to pick Rhombur if you were going first, if you're going fourth? Where do you think he shines, or does it not really matter?
Doesn't really matter, but I would say still suits is a very important spot for him. And so I would say third position at the very worst, because first position will likely be spacing, volt space. Second position is either going to be still suits or wealth. So if you're in second position, he's great. If you're in third position, you might be a little bit iffy because you might not get still suits. It's still okay if you get wealth, because that kind of fuels your dreadnoughts, because your next play afterwards is likely to go into combat, dump in a troop or two, and when you're third place, you get another 2 Solari, and that 2 Solari from wealth will fuel your dreadnought for next round, and you'll be good to go. So third position is definitely good as well. Last position, Rhombur, is going to be a bit tough. It is doable. You can pull it off, but as I said, he's a high difficulty character with a lot of great assets. But in fourth position, it's a very, very difficult situation to deal with, just simply because all of the major resource locations, and he's a very resource intensive character, are going to be snagged in the first 3 rounds. If you can't hit wealth, still suits, or smuggling, you're going to be in very big trouble because your economy is going to be suffering. So fourth position is something I would avoid entirely with Rhombur until you get used to him.
Okay. And then I guess the last thing, where would you put this leader in a tier list, S through F?
I'm going to be honest, despite how much I love this character, he's definitely an F class. There's so many characters or leaders that are so much easier to do and achieve that require a lot less skill to apply with him. I'll give you an example. Beast does combat so much easier than him. You just shove in troops with Signet, go and have fun, la-di-da, hit the Alliance, get even more troops. There's a lot of times you need to juggle getting to second place. Who wants to juggle and get to second place? And sometimes you might not even achieve that just because other people are seeing you do what you are trying to do. And so this character, although is very strong, requires a great understanding of economy in this game. And without that understanding that we've gone through and described as a preliminary type of situation, it's going to be very hard to play with this character and achieve the 10 points. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give this character an F for this time being.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I do love Rhombur. I think he affords a very fun play style, but comparing him to the other leaders, he just doesn't give you as much bang for your buck. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always glad to be a part of this experience. I mean, I said it to Orsky before, but I'm a huge fan. I actually got into Dune Imperium because of Orsky, and I'm very happy he invited me, and hopefully I'll be back again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to see Lannister rock out with Rhombur in an actual tournament game, I'll have that linked in the description as well. You can check it out. He does a very good job. He employs a lot of the strategies that we just talked about. So I think it's a very nice way to see these strategies in action.